Well, welcome to my studio. I'm Jack Jellies, and I'm a decided amateur who just loves to share some of the creative things that I like to do. And hopefully it'll inspire you to do things as well. I like to make jewelry, and although I concentrate in silver like many other people, I really love experimenting with different kinds of materials and different techniques. And so today what I'm going to do is show you a little bit about how I make these wonderful little niobium bluegill earrings. So these are die pressed in my press with a steel die, and then we anodize them to give them the beautiful coloration that they have. Niobium, like titanium, is a reactive metal. It's exceptionally hard, but surprisingly very malleable. That means that you can compress it when it's soft or annealed. You can compress it about 90% of its volume before you need to anneal it again. So by using very thin sheets of material, you can use it in a die forming situation to mold it. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this. Here's a couple of pieces of niobium. I just cut the sheet using scissors. It's fairly straightforward. What you want to do though with niobium and titanium is minimize your waste. Unlike silver, you're not going to melt this stuff in your studio. So I'm sure you could recycle it with a supplier somehow, but for me, I just keep all the little tiny scraps in case I want to do something with them. But you want to minimize your scrap. So I cut pieces that would approximate the dimension of the die. And then in this case, you want a little extra in the front. You'll see why in a bit. So I angle it just a bit to give me more use of the material with a slightly longer tongue here off the tip, off the mouth. Okay, so then you're just going to press this as you normally would. I will use first just little pieces of urethane and press it, and then I'll put like an aluminum pusher on top and give it a final press. And then I'll mark it with my name before I remove it from the die. A little bit of a pro tip for you. I like to buy these scrap aluminum pieces, slugs, off eBay by the pound. And these things are just magic when it comes to one-time use. So I use them as sacrificial pushers. And they do an absolutely phenomenal job for you, making that final detail really, really pop. So there's very few places on this particular design that are flat. There's a lot of nice curvature in it. So I'm going to put my small name here on the tail, if I can. Yep, that worked pretty well. Okay, right. So cutting this is actually very easy. Both niobium and titanium can be cut very easily using the standard jeweler's saw. Because it's such thin material though, you're going to want to use at least a 5/0 or a 6/0 blade just to keep it from grabbing too aggressively. So I'm just going to use my potter saw. I love this saw. It's just super. And we're just going to cut this out as we would any other piece. Almost done with this one. I'm just going to put in this little detail here, separate the fin from the tail, because this is a dorsal fin and it does not attach to the tail of the animal. There we go. Alrighty, so there it is. That's the first one, and we'll do another one. Notice I've left a tab here. That tab is to make it more convenient. When I go to anodize these, I have to dip them into a solution and then pass electrical current. So I need to clamp this and keep this clamp out of the solution while I submerge the piece. And you get the very, very best anodization results when you have a very low electrical resistance between your whatever you're clamping and the piece you're dipping. You can use wire and hang them, but again, that's going to have a very tiny connection, and that's a higher resistance, which makes it a little more fiddly. So I just prefer, if it's possible, to leave a little extra metal before you anodize, and then I'll just trim that off after I've finished anodizing. Now here they are cut out, and so before I clean them, I'm just going to run a very fine file over the backside just to take off that little burr that's left when you saw fine metal like this. It's very low gauge, small gauge, and so you wind up with a little burr there. And just so that it's not sharp when somebody feels it, you want to file that off. It's very straightforward. Well, I've explained the anodization process in a previous video, so I'll try to be very brief here. All we're doing is we're using energy to deposit a very thin, clear, it's perfectly transparent oxide layer on the surface of the metal. Now you'll notice that niobium and titanium are already like a silvery gray metal as it is. And that's really important because light is going to be bouncing off of that. It's reflective. And the reason it's called a reactive metal, one of the reasons, is that it reacts almost instantaneously with oxygen and to form that oxide layer. But the layer that forms is incredibly thin, and once it forms, it prevents oxygen from reaching the metal, so it stops. So this is a very, very interesting sort of situation. Now, that oxide layer that's initially formed is so thin that when the light passes through it, the speed of light is so fast that it takes no time, essentially, for the light to get to the surface of the metal and then to bounce back out. But what's going to happen is, if I could use energy and grow that oxide layer thicker and thicker and thicker, like coating it with many layers of glass, then as the light goes through that transparent layer, it's going to take a little time to get to the surface. And because it's a different material than air, it's going to be bent just a little bit by that material, called refraction. Okay, so what's going to happen is the light that passes through the layer is going to hit the metallic niobium and bounce back out. Well, there's also going to be light bouncing off of the surface of the glassy oxide layer at this exact same angle. But because they are coming out of phase with one another, it took time to get through that layer, and the light is somewhat bent just a little bit, so that you're going to get differences in the phase relationships of all the different wavelengths of light as it exits that surface. So what's going to happen is there's going to be what's called constructive and destructive interference. And so many wavelengths are going to just disappear, and maybe one wavelength or one small combination of wavelengths will remain. And that's what gives you the apparent color. There's no pigmentation. So to generate your palette, what I do is take a piece of niobium and just run it through different voltages, and you can see that different voltages will deposit different thicknesses of oxide, and that gives you differential refractive colors. So this is a particularly interesting one, because the way I want to do this one is the easiest way, and I want to do it by subtracting colors. So I'm going to start with this greenish color that I want the bulk of the body to be. Why? Because it is the highest voltage. So what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to color the whole thing that way. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to remove selectively with a little scratchy wheel. I'm going to remove part of the belly, and then I'm going to do the belly with a lower voltage. Now, when I dip the whole piece back in with a lower voltage, the green will remain, but only the exposed niobium will now have an oxide layer deposited on it that's going to be a little thinner. And then when I get done with that one, I'm going to want there to be like a blue-gray on the tips of all the fins, so I will abrade that, and then I'll redo it again. And finally, I'm going to want a dark spot on the gill and the eye, so I'll be abrading those areas and doing it a fourth time. So it's really kind of a neat system. Alrighty, so I've got a solution of trisodium phosphate here. My bath is just distilled water with trisodium phosphate. There's a stainless steel sheet that I've attached the negative electrode to, and that's going to be one electrode. Then I attach the positive electrode to my piece. Notice how I'm grabbing it by that tab. I want to dip this into the solution when I'm passing current, and it will stop passing current when it has reached the target voltage. In this case, I'm going to aim for about 90 to 93, and we'll see if that does good enough. You can adjust it on the fly if you need to. You want to be very, very careful not to dip this part of the thing, this clip, into the bath, because this is made out of like a tinned copper, and it will have a much different resistance, much lower resistance than the niobium. So if you accidentally dip that in there, it's going to just pass all the current, almost all the current, through that, and nothing happens to the niobium. So you need to keep that part dry. Okay, also, never, cross these things. Never short-circuit it, and be aware that you're working with electricity in this case, and it's inherently dangerous. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn this on, So now what it's going to do, you see that it's currently passing zero current because there's no connection. But as soon as I make a complete circuit with this, it's going to start passing current. But that current is going to continue to drop as the oxide layer builds, and the oxide layer becomes an insulator. So hopefully we will wind up producing that green color. So you notice it went to about there, 0 amps. Okay, so let's pull it out. That's as much as it's going to do. And look at that beautiful, beautiful green color. So that's our first anodization. Now to generate the pattern that I want on this, again, I just do it by hand, I'm going to want to get a yellowish, goldish belly. So what I'm going to do is just use a abrasive wheel, and I'm going to remove the oxide from that region. There we go. Now I'm going to go over and re-anodize it, but this time with a lower voltage. The lower voltage is not going to do anything to this previously anodized layer because it is a thicker layer already and it's insulating. But wherever I've removed the coating of oxide, we'll now have a different thickness of oxide deposited and hence a different color. Alrighty, hopefully you can see that what I've done now is simply change the target voltage to 55, which I'm hoping is going to be in the range of this golden yellow. And I'm going to re-anodize the entire piece exactly the same as I did before. There. But see, because there's such a small area involved, it won't give me much, it won't take much time to do that. Yep, it's just a little bit of a yellowish. Let's try this one. And now I'm going to want to put a little bit of a gray-blue on the fins for a contrast. So again, no surprise here. All I'm going to do is abrade the oxide. And then we go anodize again, but once again at a lower voltage. Okay, for this one I'm going to set a target voltage of 22 volts. What I'd like it to be in my palette is going to be like a gray-blue that will contrast with the green and the gold of the body of the animal. So I've got it set to 22 volts, and we will anodize. There, see how quickly that goes? Because, again, there's very little area there to be anodized. And you notice, oh boy, that turns out nicely, doesn't it? That puts that blue-gray at the tips wherever I've abraded the oxide layer. Yeah, it's very nice. So we'll do the second one. Takes just a moment. Okay, so last step will be just to put two little dots of gray-black on the eyeball and a little spot on the gill. For these tinier spots, instead of that wheel, I'm just going to use a little abrasive stick. You know, you can do this by hand. There's nothing magical about any of this. You just need to be able to scrape off that little bit of oxide over tiny areas. So I'm just going to do first the tip of the gill, and then the eye. That's all that takes. We'll see how that turns out. And we'll do the other one. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. So let's go anodize these. So here you can see I've set my target voltage to about 16 volts, which hopefully will be in this dark range. And that'll give me a nice dark contrast for that little tiny spot and the eyeball. Yep, that looks very nice. And we'll do the second one. Yep, looks pretty good. Okay, last thing we're going to do is simply cut the tab carefully so that we can put an ear wire on there. You can use scissors, but I find I get a better result with my saw. There, and I'll just use a file to clean up that little nub there. So I pair them with handmade niobium ear wires, and that completes them. And they'll go into the shop to be sold. Anyway, so you can do this technique with a variety of different dyes and designs, and what I look for are things that are going to match the color palette that I have available with the anodization process. Because the reality is, of course, that you are limited a little more in this than you would be if you were using pigments. For example, it's almost impossible, I've not found it possible, to get a nice red color, for example. You can approximate it, but that's not going to be something that will happen easily. So anyway, hopefully this will help you in your journey to play with different kinds of metals in jewelry, and especially the reactive metals, niobium and titanium.